There are places in the galaxy that defy understanding, places where the laws of life and death, of hunger and thought, blur into something unholy. Within the nightmare fleets that drift across the void, there are worlds that are not worlds, but living vessels, colossal organic labyrinths that pulse with alien purpose. These are the Tyranid bio-ships, creatures so vast and ancient that even the most battle-hardened Magos biologists tremble at the thought of studying them. To step inside one is not to enter a structure, it is to be swallowed whole by a mindless god. Imagine the air thick with organic mist, the walls glistening with mucous membranes that twitch as though breathing. Every sound, every heartbeat echoes through miles of living tissue, and beneath it all, the ship itself is alive, aware, sensing every vibration through veins and tendons of alien matter. It knows you are there. It tastes your fear in the air.
And it hungers. Before we descend into this impossible place,
we walk the corridors of flesh and nerve that make up the stomach of the great devourer if you wish to see more of the horrors that lie within the galaxy of the 41st millennium. Like, share, and subscribe. It helps this channel reach more of those who dare to look beyond the void, and it ensures that the next descent into the unknown finds you first. The void was silent when they found it, a shadow on the Auspex, vast and slow, coasting through the cold between stars. At first, it appeared like any derelict, its form blurred by interference, its silhouette lost within a cloud of organic matter. But, as the vigilant promise drew nearer, the interference did not fade. It grew worse. Vox static became a low, droning hum, like the vibration of a creature's throat. The ship's augers spat data in confusion. Distances bent. Mass readings changed with every scan. And when they finally saw it, truly saw it, no one on the bridge could speak. It was not a vessel. It was a living continent, a colossal structure of flesh and bone, ridged with plates that moved like breathing ribs, glistening under the faint light of a dying star. Tendrils stretched into the void, pulsing with bioluminescent veins that flickered like lightning trapped in liquid. It had no engines, no visible systems of propulsion, yet it drifted forward with terrible intent, as if carried by hunger alone. The Imperial surveyor assigned to the mission, Lucian Grail, felt his throat tighten as he watched the thing rotate on the viewing screen. He had seen Tyranid organisms before, in briefings and picked feeds from distant war zones. But this was different. This wasn't a swarm beast or a planetary organism. This was a cathedral of consumption, something so massive that calling it a ship seemed obscene. They should have fled then. Every instinct in the Voidborn crew screamed retreat. But orders were orders. The ship's Magos biologists insisted they must investigate. The data could be priceless, the knowledge invaluable to the Ordo Xenos. And so, against every primal whisper of fear, the vigilant promise launched a boarding skiff, the airlock sealed with a heavy thud. Lucian and his 5-man crew descended into the black. Their vessel shuddered as they neared the biomass. At first, the exterior seemed inert, a dark plain of chitin ridges. Then, as they approached, the surface rippled. Pores opened like eyes, wet and shining. A fine mist sprayed from unseen glands, clouding their floodlights. Their pilot swore under his breath. The hull of the Tyranid structure seemed to react to the presence of metal, flexing, pulsing, reaching. When they made contact, the skiff did not land. It was swallowed. The hull gave way, sinking into a mucus sheath that clung to every surface. Instruments flickered out. Power fluctuated. A sound filled the cabin, not mechanical, but biological, a deep, resonant heartbeat echoing through the walls. The Majos muttered in binary prayer as the entry ramp hissed open. The first breath inside was like inhaling another creature's lungs. The air was thick, wet, heavy with chemical sweetness and decay. Every step sank into a layer of pulsing tissue that released pale steam with each movement. The walls glistened with translucent slime, lined with muscular ridges that flexed as if in response to their presence. Somewhere above, veins pulsed with luminous ichor, casting shifting patterns of yellow-green light. Lucian activated his Vox recorder, his voice trembling, despite his attempt at composure. Initial entry confirmed. Interior, organic.
Structural composition unknown. Air.
Breathable but contaminated. The device crackled, sputtered, and went silent. The Vox link was gone. They were alone. A rhythmic sound echoed down the corridor ahead, a wet, peristaltic thrum that might have been the movement of fluids through vast arteries. They followed it, drawn by both duty and morbid fascination. The corridors twisted like intestines, branching into passages that seemed to rearrange themselves when unobserved. A sensation pressed against the edges of Lucian's consciousness, like static, but deeper. Not sound.
Not thought.
Something else. The Magos halted and extended a mechadendrite into the wall, extracting a sample of tissue. The wall reacted violently, tightening around the instrument. A gout of viscous fluid splattered across his robes. The tech priest staggered back, mechanical limbs flailing as the wall healed itself. The hole sealed shut in seconds, leaving no trace of damage. "It regenerates," he murmured through his Vox grill, voice distorted by fear. Lucian tried to respond, but his throat was dry. The air had grown warmer, more humid. Each breath tasted like blood and copper. The ship seemed to pulse faster, as if aware of their intrusion. The sound of the heartbeat grew louder. The pilot, Harvan, reached for his last pistol.
Something's moving, he hissed.
The others turned. At the edge of their lights, the walls bulged outward, forming shapes that almost resembled faces, melted, half-formed and twitching. The Magos whispered a litany to the Omnissiah. Lucian stepped forward, trying to maintain control. "Keep your weapons low."
"We're not here to provoke," he never finished.
The floor beneath him shifted. It rippled like a muscle under strain, throwing him forward. He hit the ground hard, hands sinking wrist-deep into the pulsing membrane. For a heartbeat, it held him there, alive, breathing, feeling. The texture beneath his palms was not inert tissue. It was a rhythm, a pulse. He could feel the ship's life moving beneath it, flowing through arteries larger than hab tunnels. He tore himself free, gasping, his gloves slick with fluid that shimmered faintly in the light. "It's feeding," the Magos whispered. "By the Omnissiah. It's metabolically active. We're walking through the stomach of a god." No one spoke after that. The silence was broken only by the heartbeat. Slow, patient, infinite. They pressed deeper. The corridors grew narrower, slicker. Fluids dripped from above, hissing as they struck the metal of their boots. The bioluminescent veins now pulsed faster, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Lucian's recorder flickered back to life for a moment, enough to catch a single phrase whispered into the static. "It knows we are here." Then the Vox died again. The sound of movement came next, not the rhythmic motion of the ship, but something deliberate.
A dragging scrape.
A wet, heavy step echoing from the passage ahead. The light caught a glimpse, a tendril retreating into the dark, leaving a smear of fluid in its wake. The crew froze. The Magos tried to activate his auspex, but the readings were nonsensical. Heat everywhere, life signatures impossible to count. Lucian swallowed hard.
"Stay close," he whispered.
We moved together, slow and quiet. But as they took their first careful steps forward, the walls around them shuddered, and a sound like breathing filled the corridor. The air thickened with a sour chemical mist. The flesh beneath their boots tensed, and then, somewhere deep within the walls of the ship, something opened its eyes. The light shifted from green to red. The heartbeat quickened. The ship had noticed them. Lucian felt the pressure shift as though the entire corridor inhaled. The membrane walls flexed inward, exhaling a wet gust that reeked of rot and ozone. His vox bead crackled with static so thick it felt alive, whispering in tones he couldn't quite decipher. The Magos biologist fell to his knees, mechanical limbs twitching as data streams overloaded his systems.
It's communicating, he rasped. No, not words. Recognition. It sees us. Harvin raised his pistol toward the darkness, his voice breaking into panic.
What the hell does that mean? But before anyone could answer, a low vibration rolled through the deck, a deep, thrumming tone that bypassed their ears entirely. It was felt in the bones, like a predator's growl reverberating inside the skull. The lights flickered as biological filaments overhead pulsed brighter, casting crimson veins of light across the corridor. The ship was alive, not in a passive biological sense, but aware, reactive. It wasn't reacting to movement or sound. It was responding to thoughts. Lucian felt a twinge behind his eyes, an intrusive presence that probed the edges of his mind like a cold fingertip. The sensation was neither pain nor touch, but an invasion of privacy deeper than either. He staggered back, clutching his head.
It's inside, he managed to whisper. Something's inside my thoughts. The Magos staggered upright, voice fragmented through vox distortion.
Hive neural echo.
A splinter of synaptic will.
You are being sampled. The idea alone was enough to shatter composure. The crew began to argue in panicked bursts, their words overlapping, fear ricocheting through the chamber. The bio-walls responded in kind, their pulse accelerating, fluids churning with invisible veins like the vessel's blood, running hot with adrenaline. Each heartbeat of the ship matched their own. Lucian tried to impose order, shouting through the noise.
We stay together. Keep moving forward. Backtracking will only... But his voice broke as a shape unfolded from the wall ahead.
It didn't emerge from an opening. It grew from the flesh, forming out of tissue that reshaped itself into limbs and carapace. The creature was not fully formed, its exoskeleton translucent and dripping. It had too many eyes, each black and lidless, reflecting the light like pools of oil. Its mouth opened sideways, revealing feeder tendrils that quivered in anticipation. Harvin fired instinctively. The lasbolt struck the thing's torso, searing a smoking hole into its translucent hide. The creature shrieked, not in pain, but in an echo of the ship's voice. The very walls screamed with it. Fluid sprayed from the wound, hitting the ground and sizzling into vapor. The floor convulsed, throwing them backward as the creature collapsed, half-melted. Its body was absorbed by the floor before their eyes, devoured by the surrounding tissue in seconds. Silence followed, but it was not relief. It was waiting. Lucian's chest heaved as he stared at the space where the creature had stood. It's regenerating itself, he said softly. We're walking through something that can grow its own defense. The Magos turned toward him, his mechanical eyes flickering. You misunderstand, Surveyor. That was not a defense. He pointed to the ceiling, where faint sacs of flesh began to tremble, glowing with internal light. That was a scout. The defenses are coming. The air changed again, warmer now, saturated with pheromonal scents that made thought sluggish. Lucian's pulse quickened. He could feel the influence tightening around his mind, a psychic fog that whispered urges, surrender, stillness, silence. It was not commanding in words, but through instinct, a compulsion that spoke directly to the body's ancient fear of predators. The hive mind did not reason. It devoured. They began to run. The walls seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, looping into organic mazes that bent the laws of geometry. The sound of pursuit grew louder, not footsteps but the wet slithering of flesh, the scraping of talons against bone. Lucian caught glimpses in the corners of his vision, eyeless drones crawling along the ceiling, their bodies fusing with the tissue around them. The Mago stumbled, one leg sparking as its servo motors failed. Lucian grabbed him, hauling him upright.
Keep moving.
But the tech priest's gaze had gone distant, his vox humming in binary static.
"It's showing me,"
he murmured. Endless corridors of flesh, a core of thought beneath a sea of blood.
"It's a synapse node, alive with data."
"Snap out of it!" Lucian shouted, shaking him.
"You're not talking to a machine."
The Magos blinked once, as if realizing something terrible.
"No," he whispered. "It's talking to me," he screamed, body arching as sparks burst from his implants.
The smell of burning circuitry filled the air. His cybernetics overloaded, eyes glowing white, mouth frozen open. Then abruptly, he went still. The light in his augmetics faded. When Lucian pulled back, the Magos' flesh was no longer flesh. It was dissolving, liquefying into the floor like wax. The ship had reclaimed him. They ran without direction, driven by terror rather than strategy. The corridors no longer seemed stable. Walls pulsed in and out, sealing behind them, forcing them ever deeper. The organic floor began to tilt, carrying them downward, as if the entire vessel was drawing them toward its center. The heartbeat grew deafening. Harvin stumbled, grabbing Lucian's arm. "We're being pulled in!"
"Like it's digesting us."
Lucian didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was filled with whispers, images not his own. A million eyes staring through darkness. A hunger that had no end. He saw worlds consumed, skies blackened by wings. He saw himself, a fragment of meat inside an infinite being. And in that vision, he understood. The ship was not an individual creature. It was a mouthpiece, a nerve ending of something so vast that no human mind could endure its true form. He tried to steady his breath. He whispered half a prayer to the Emperor, though he doubted any god could hear him here. The air was growing thicker now, filled with spores that glittered in the beam of his lamp. Each particle pulsed faintly as though alive. He realized dimly that breathing them meant infection, that their very lungs were being colonized, converted cell by cell into something alien. Harvin began to cough. Thick strands of mucus spilled from his lips, tinged with blue. His eyes widened as the skin beneath his jaw began to twitch, rippling as if something moved beneath it. Lucian grabbed him, desperate.
"Stay with me, damn you!"
But Harvin's pupils had dilated to black pits, and his voice, when it came, was not entirely his. "It's inside us now," he said in a voice layered with echoes. "We're part of the choir." Lucian stumbled backward, horror freezing him in place as the first tendrils of the ship's influence wrapped around his mind like vines. Somewhere deep inside, the realization formed. The bioship didn't just digest flesh, it digested identity, and they were already being consumed. Lucian staggered backward, his breath coming in ragged gasps as Harvin's body convulsed before him. The man's skin shifted hue, veins blackening as his spine arched unnaturally. Beneath the surface, muscles rippled with movements not his own, like worms crawling beneath parchment. Lucian tried to drag him away, but Harvin's fingers clawed into the pulsing floor, embedding themselves in the flesh. The membrane responded, wrapping around his arms, cocooning him slowly. Harvin's scream was short-lived. The ship muffled it, swallowing the sound as the man disappeared beneath layers of glistening tissue. Only a faint outline remained, a human shape dissolving, merging, becoming.
Lucian fell to his knees, his lungs burning from the toxic air.
He wanted to scream, to curse, to demand explanation from a universe that offered none. But all that left his throat was a hoarse whisper.
"Emperor, protect us!" The prayer was devoured by the sound of the ship breathing.
The pulse had become rhythmic now, steady, synchronized with his own heart. It was no longer just the sound of a beast. It was a rhythm of control, as though the ship was teaching his body how to beat in time with it. His limbs trembled as a strange warmth crept up his neck, a chemical calm that dulled his fear. He realized then that even emotion was being eaten, consumed, digested into obedience. He forced himself to move. His suit's light flickered weakly, casting pale halos across the corridor. The walls seemed to be watching, forming vague shapes of eyes that blinked and reformed, the patterns of veins shifting like thought given flesh. He pressed forward through a narrow passage that stank of ammonia and spoiled meat, one hand against the wall to keep his balance. The texture beneath his palm was unnervingly soft, like the skin of a newborn. At the end of the passage, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. The scale of it stole the breath from his lungs. The ceiling was lost in darkness, vast and curved like the inside of a lung. Below it, pillars of bone and cartilage supported translucent sacs filled with bioluminescent fluid. Shapes drifted inside them, silhouettes of half-formed organisms suspended in embryonic stillness. Some had limbs, others had none. All of them twitched faintly, as if dreaming. Lucian realized this was not a corridor at all. It was an organ, a living part of the ship's anatomy, pulsating with purpose. Thin filaments of nerve tissue stretched across the floor, converging toward a central node that throbbed like a gigantic heart. Every beat sent tremors through the ground. The sound filled him, vibrating in his bones. He knew instinctively that this was where digestion began, the place where matter, once living, became the raw material for creation. He stepped closer. The smell of acid burned his throat. All around him, faint shapes floated within translucent walls, objects that didn't belong. A laser gun corroded beyond use.
Fragments of armor bearing the Aquila.
A human skull stripped of flesh and fused into the membrane like a relic in glass. He touched the wall near it, and the flesh quivered, releasing a wet hiss. The membrane responded by excreting a clear fluid that rolled over the skull and dissolved what remained of it in seconds. The sound was sickeningly gentle, like water over stone. Lucian staggered back, bile rising in his throat. The realization hit him with full clarity. This chamber wasn't just where things died. It was where they were reborn. A low vibration stirred through the chamber. Different this time, more focused. He turned and saw the far wall split open along an invisible seam. A gash of light flared as new tendrils uncoiled, sliding down from above like vines. They hung in the air, glistening, swaying with deliberate rhythm. One brushed against the floor near his boot and immediately reacted, coiling upward, wrapping around his ankle. The texture was slick and warm, pulsing with veins that moved like tiny hearts. He slashed at it with his knife, severing the tendril, but the wound sprayed a mist of glowing ichor that burned his skin through the fabric. The air filled with the stench of raw ammonia and copper.
More tendrils began to descend, reaching for him like the slow fingers of a drowning dream.
Lucian stumbled back, lungs screaming for air. He fired his pistol into the nearest cluster, 3 red flashes that cut through the gloom, but for every severed strand, 2 more formed. He ran. The chamber's floor rippled beneath his boots, trying to drag him down, but adrenaline cut through the haze. His mind flooded with flashes, Harvan's voice, the Margos's scream, the feel of the living ship's pulse against his hands. All of it felt distant, fading, as if the bioship were editing his memory. He reached the far side of the chamber and stumbled through a narrow slit in the wall, falling into another corridor. Behind him, the chamber sealed shut with a fleshy sigh. He was alone again, surrounded by the sound of breathing walls. His pistol was nearly drained. His recorder was dead. His thoughts were slipping, and then silence, no pulse, no hum, only stillness. The air grew colder, drier. He realized he had crossed some unseen threshold, the living flesh giving way to something more cerebral, more deliberate. The walls here were different, thinner, webbed with nerve fibers that shimmered with faint psychic energy. The smell of rot was gone, replaced by ozone and faint whispers that seemed to echo without sound. He took a trembling step forward. The whisper became words, not in any language he knew, but in meaning. They weren't external. They resonated inside his skull.
Fragments of thought not his own.
A warning or perhaps a welcome. You have been tasted. The words faded as quickly as they came. He leaned against the wall, gasping. The tissue beneath his hand was cold, so cold it burned. In the distance, a faint light pulsed, blue, rhythmic, beckoning like a signal. His instinct screamed at him to turn back, but reason was already gone. There was nothing to return to. The crew was gone. The promise would not wait. He was part of this now, whether he wished it or not. He followed the light. Each step brought him closer to something vast and terrible, a consciousness pressing against his own, just beyond the veil of thought. The air seemed to thin, yet his body moved as though pulled by unseen gravity. He did not know then what waited beyond that light, only that he was descending not just into the ship, but into something greater, something that had no end. As he stepped into the pulsing glow, his shadow vanished against the walls of living flesh. The ship exhaled once more, slow and deliberate,
As though satisfied, Lucian Grail was now inside the mind of the beast, and somewhere,
deep in the unseen dark of the ship's core, something whispered back. The deeper we wandered, the less the ship resembled anything that could be called a vessel. It felt more like being digested than being trapped. The air grew thick with a faint mist, alive with drifting spores that shimmered when they caught the faint biolight. Each breath felt heavier, as if the ship itself were pressing its will against our lungs. I began to notice that the walls no longer just moved. They listened. When we spoke, the sounds of our voices rippled through the membranes, the vibrations traveling down the passageways until they vanished into the distance, as though carried off to some unseen mind buried in the creature's heart. There were 4 of us then. Myself, Lieutenant Marek of the Astra Militarum, a Mechanicus engine seer named Olith, and a ship's sister from the Odila's Mercy's medical sanctum, Sister Talana. Marek still wore his carapace armor, though most of its systems had gone inert. The auspex flickered and died the moment we stepped deeper into the vessel. Olith moved with a strange calm. The crimson of her robes darkened with alien slime, her mechadendrites twitching nervously as she whispered canticles to the Omnissiah. Talana clutched her rosarius and prayed, almost constantly, her voice trembling yet unbroken. It was Talana who first claimed to hear them. At first, I thought it was shock. She stopped walking mid-step, eyes distant, murmuring something about voices beneath the hum. Marek cursed softly and told her to keep moving, but then Olith froze as well. The engine seer's mechanical eye whirred, focusing on nothing.
I asked what she saw. She only said that the ship was singing. The sound began subtle, a tremor, low and resonant, felt more through the bones than the ears.
Then it grew clearer, 1,000 overlapping whispers weaving through one another like the breath of ghosts. Words without language, meaning carried through emotion, hunger, purpose, unity. I could feel it pressing into my skull, not as a command but as an invitation. We tried to block it out. Marek fired his las pistol into the wall. The bolt was absorbed by the flesh like water striking clay, leaving behind only a blackened welt that slowly sealed itself. The sound stopped for a moment. Then, from the wall itself, a slow pulse of light rippled outward, and the whispers returned, louder, more insistent. Olith said the ship was communicating, its biosynapses resonating through every surface. It's the synaptic echo, she murmured. We're standing inside its nerve cluster.
The hive mind itself is...
Watching, the thought froze me. The hive mind. That impossible, galaxy-spanning consciousness that bound every Tyranid creature together. Even a whisper of its awareness was enough to drive psychers mad, to burn astropaths into blind husks. And yet here we were, breathing inside one of its thoughts. Hours blurred, or perhaps days. Time did not flow properly within the beast. The light from its veins shifted with no rhythm.
Our rations spoiled.
Our chronometers glitched into nonsense. We followed the paths that seemed to want to be followed, drawn by rhythmic pulses that guided us deeper. The corridors narrowed, then opened into vast chambers where walls throbbed with organs the size of tanks, beating in slow, wet rhythm. The air here reeked of ammonia and raw blood. We found pools, not of water, but of some nutrient fluid, bubbling softly, within which shapes writhed, limbs, eyes, skulls half-formed. Sister Talana whispered prayers faster, her voice cracking with fear. Olith only stared transfixed. "It's growing them," she said.
"It's studying us. I think it's trying to make something in our image." The whispers surged again, louder now, until the sound filled every nerve.
My mind flashed with impossible imagery. Endless tendrils coiling through stars, cities devoured, planets turned to bone. And then faintly, among that roaring unity, I thought I heard something different. A voice separate from the rest. It was quiet, almost human. It said my name. I turned, thinking one of my companions had spoken, but their faces told me they'd heard nothing. Still, I felt it again. A presence brushing the edge of my thoughts, patient, curious. We reached a new chamber then, vast and cathedral-like, its walls rising high into darkness. The floor pulsed with pale, translucent tissue. Suspended above was a column of flesh that beat like a heart, connected to every wall by thick veins of glowing fluid. The sound of the whispers faded here, replaced by a deep, steady rhythm. Olith identified it at once. "The synaptic core," she whispered. "The command node." "We're in the mind's cradle." Marek drew his weapon again, even knowing it was useless. "Then we destroy it, or we die trying." But the ship reacted before he even fired. The walls rippled violently, and a flood of bioluminescent fluid poured from the ceiling. The chamber filled with blinding light, and I felt something enter my head, not as pain, but as revelation. Thoughts not my own poured through me, shapes of other worlds, the hunger of the swarm, the ecstasy of consumption. The hive mind was showing us its truth, and at the center of it all, like a candle in the dark, was that same small, distinct voice, human, calling my name again. "You shouldn't have come here. It wasn't warning me." It was welcoming me. The light subsided slowly, fading into a pale, rhythmic glow that pulsed like a heartbeat through the walls. We stood motionless, drenched in the ship's viscous fluid, our eyes adjusting to the dim bioluminescence. Marek was the first to move, wiping the slime from his visor and muttering a curse beneath his breath. But his voice sounded distant, as if muffled by layers of alien thought pressing down upon us. Sister Talana knelt, trembling. Her lips moved in prayer, yet I could tell she was not certain to whom she prayed anymore. Her gaze flicked to the fleshy column above, and I followed it. Shapes moved within that organ, silhouettes forming and dissolving, humanoid outlines that melted into the organic mass before fully taking form. Olith raised one of her mechadendrites, the sensor tip, flickering with static. "The bioelectric field here is self-replicating," she murmured. "It's absorbing signal patterns, linguistic, emotional, even neurological.
It's learning through us." It dawned on me then what she meant.
The ship wasn't merely alive, it was aware. Every step, every sound, every flicker of thought we made fed into its growing understanding of humanity. It was dissecting us not with claws or scalpels, but with curiosity. And somewhere in that impossible communion, the human voice returned. This time, it wasn't in my mind alone. It echoed faintly through the chamber, distorted, fragile, but undeniably human.
A man's voice, old, weary, and resonant with pain.
"Do not struggle," it said. "You'll only wake it faster." Marek aimed his las pistol toward the sound. "Who's there?"
Identify yourself.
No response.
Only the echo bouncing off the wet walls.
Then a wet, tearing noise. The wall beside us split open like a wound, revealing a shape inside.
A man's body half fused with the surrounding tissue.
His skin was pale, his veins dark with alien ichor. Tubes of organic material ran through his flesh, merging seamlessly into the wall behind him. His eyes were open, unfocused, yet somehow aware. Sister Talana gasped and stepped back. Olith whispered a binary prayer to the machine god, her voice quivering with awe and horror. The man spoke again, this time directly into our minds.
"I was like you once."
Crew of a captured vessel.
"It keeps us
For study." His words came in broken pulses, each syllable overlapping with the ship's heartbeat. It learns through us and our speech, our faith, our defiance.
We are not prisoners, we are prototypes." Marek stepped closer despite my warning. "How long have you been here?"
He demanded. The man's expression shifted slightly, amusement or perhaps pity.
"Time has no meaning here."
The hive remembers through us. We are echoes of understanding. Before any of us could respond, the chamber convulsed violently. The walls rippled like waves beneath a storm. The man screamed, not from pain, but from connection. His mouth opened wide and a cascade of pheromone mist erupted from his throat, filling the air with a sickly sweet scent. Olith's senses went wild.
"It's broadcasting,"
she shouted. "The ship is transmitting through him. He's the conduit." The man's eyes rolled back. From his mouth a sound emerged unlike anything I'd heard. A layered harmony of millions of voices, shrieking and whispering in perfect unison. It was the hive mind itself, resonating through a human tongue. We fell to our knees as the air thickened. Thoughts not our own surged inside us. Memories of creatures we'd never been, sensations of flight, hunger, and unity. For one brief, horrifying instant, I felt what it meant to belong to that mind. The peace of surrender, the perfection of purpose. Talana's voice broke through the madness, screaming a litany of hatred and faith. The ship recoiled, as though burned by her prayer. The light dimmed, and the man's body fell silent, his face frozen in an expression of unnatural calm. We backed away, panting. Olith's metal hand trembled.
"It tried to merge us," she whispered.
It wanted to connect, to make us part of its
neural memory.
We were on the edge of assimilation. Marek holstered his weapon, his voice hoarse. Then we move, before it tries again. We turned toward a tunnel that had opened during the convulsion, a fresh wound in the living wall, slick and beckoning. I looked back once at the fallen man. His mouth was still open, and from it, faint light pulsed like breath. Even in death, the ship was listening. We stepped into the new corridor, and for the first time, I noticed the sound of our footsteps syncing perfectly with the heartbeat of the ship, as if we were already becoming part of its rhythm. The tunnel sloped downward, its walls glistening with a translucent membrane that shifted in color as we passed. Green, violet, then a bruised red. The air was hot, humid, almost suffocating. Each breath carried a faint metallic taste, like copper dissolved in blood. Beneath our boots, the flesh felt soft, almost cushioning, and with each step it seemed to mold to our weight, reshaping slightly as though learning our gait. Olith's mechadendrites brushed the wall and recoiled instantly.
"It's mapping us," she hissed.
Recording muscle movement, bone density, heat signatures. It's
adapting. Sister Talana crossed herself and whispered, "Emperor, guide our souls," though her voice trembled now, hollow and small, against the vastness of what surrounded us.
Marek, stubborn as ever, kept his pistol raised and moved ahead, trying to ignore the rhythmic pulse that shook the tunnel. But the further we went, the more the beat changed. Slower, deeper, almost measured, like a voice breathing through the floor. Then the whispers returned. They were different now, not chaotic like before. They carried structure, cadence, almost language. The ship was evolving, using fragments of our speech, threading human words between alien tones. Hungry. Learn. Join. Each word landed like a pulse through the skull.
I clenched my jaw until I tasted blood, forcing myself to keep walking.
The tunnel opened into a vast spherical chamber, the air hazy with spores that glowed faintly, forming drifting constellations around a central pit. The pit itself pulsed with light. Its walls were lined with rows of organic pods, each one shaped disturbingly like a coffin or a womb.
Inside the nearest one I saw movement. A shape. Human. Marek stepped forward to inspect it, but Olith grabbed his arm.
"Don't touch it." The pod's membrane was thin, and through it I could see the being inside. Pale, hairless, its skin glistening with a wet sheen. Its face was almost human, almost.
Its eyes were too large, its limbs too long, its veins pulsing with that same greenish biolight that ran through the ship.
The thing's mouth opened, and it spoke. It used my voice. Every word that left its lips was one I had spoken since waking aboard this creature. It mimicked tone, inflection, even the small tremors of fear. Olith's sensors confirmed what we already suspected. "It's cloning neural patterns," she said softly. "It's reproducing memory through organic imitation." The clone pressed its hands against the membrane, its expression vacant yet pleading. And then, in a quiet imitation of my own voice, it whispered, "Let me out!" Marek raised his pistol instantly.
"That thing isn't you." "I know," I said. "But I didn't stop him, he fired."
The lasbolt burned through the pod, igniting the fluid within. The creature inside screamed, my scream, as the pod burst in a spray of bioluminescent ichor. The light of the pit flickered violently, and the entire chamber seemed to shudder in pain. Dozens of other pods began to twitch and convulse, their occupants stirring. The whispers became shrieks, a cacophony of overlapping human voices. Some sounded like us.
"Others were entirely alien. We've awakened the nursery," Olith shouted. "Run!"
We fled across the chamber, the floor pulsing beneath our boots like muscle under strain. The pods ruptured one by one, spilling half-formed creatures onto the slick ground. Things with human faces and chitinous limbs, screaming in dissonant echoes of prayers and machine cant. The hive ship's heartbeat accelerated, and from the ceiling above, strands of flesh descended like tendrils, lashing blindly. Trying to grasp us, we sprinted through another tunnel, this one narrower, almost collapsing around us. The heat grew unbearable. The whispers fused into one deafening roar, words merging into a single command pulsing inside my skull. "Stay." But somehow, through the terror and the suffocating noise, Talana began to sing. Her voice was ragged, cracked, yet the hymn that left her lips was pure and radiant. A hymn of the Emperor's light, one every child of the Imperium learns before they even speak. The words struck through the psychic storm like a blade of fire. The tendrils recoiled, and the whispers faltered. The tunnel ahead split open in response, revealing a steep ascent bathed in dim blue light. We climbed, gasping, crawling through layers of slick membrane until at last the air grew cooler. Behind us the sounds quieted, the hive withdrawing, the chorus fading into distant murmurs. When we emerged into the next chamber, the ceiling stretched high above, glimmering with faint, translucent stars, organs filled with phosphorescent gas, simulating the void. For the first time since our capture,
I could almost breathe. Marek collapsed against the wall, his armor caked in alien fluid.
Olith sat in silence, her augmetics twitching sporadically. Talana still whispered prayers, but now her eyes shone with something close to defiance. The ship had shown us its voice, its mind, its imitation of man. And somehow, through that encounter, we'd earned its interest, because as we rested, the walls pulsed once more, softly, rhythmically.
In time with our own heartbeats, and I realized,
With a slow and dreadful certainty that the hive wasn't done with us. It was waiting. We woke to a silence that was wrong. Not the absence of sound, but the silence of something listening intently. The hush before a predator strikes. The air inside the chamber had grown colder, thinner. The faint phosphorescent lights above flickered like dying stars. The walls had changed too. The pulsing veins that once glowed faint green now carried a darker hue, a sluggish violet, as though the ship's blood itself had thickened. Marek stirred first, his breath fogging the air. "It's colder," he muttered, rubbing his hands together. "Ships don't get cold in the void."
not like this. It's doing it on purpose. Olith's eyes darted across her auspex, its rune screen pulsing erratically.
No power fluctuations. The bioenergy field is stable. This is deliberate regulation, environmental conditioning.
It's trying to slow us. Sister Talana didn't speak.
She simply watched the walls, her expression blank, the faint light catching the rosarius at her neck. When she finally did speak, it was barely more than a whisper. "I can still hear it." We froze. She pressed her hand against the wall. "The voices, they don't speak in words anymore."
They're feeling through me. Olith approached cautiously, scanning.
"Psychic interference. Residual synaptic contact."
It left part of its network inside her mind. I saw Talana's lips tremble.
"It's not interference."
It's understanding. And then the wall in front of her opened.
Not like before. Not violently, but gently, as though parting to make way.
A circular aperture of glistening tissue peeled back, revealing a tunnel that descended deep into darkness.
The edges of the opening pulsed softly, almost invitingly. Marek cursed.
"That's a maw. A feeding duct." Olith shook her head slowly. "No, it is not a digestive tract. A neural conduit."
"The ship is calling to her." Talana turned to us, her face pale but serene.
"I think it wants to show us something." I wanted to refuse.
Every instinct screamed to stay away from that living wound, but the ship pulsed once more. And in my head, I heard the voice again, the one that had spoken my name before. "See what I see." So we descended. The tunnel sloped downward into complete darkness, the walls damp and breathing. The further we went, the more the air vibrated with a faint hum. Not sound, but thought. My vision blurred at the edges as though the world itself were being rewritten around me. Then light returned, a deep, pulsating glow ahead, illuminating what looked like the inside of a colossal skull. We had entered the cerebral vault. The walls were lined with nerve cords thicker than my body, pulsing with streams of green light that vanished into a massive, central organ, a pulsating sphere the size of a tank, suspended by tendrils of living flesh. It looked almost like a brain, but constantly reshaping itself, folding and unfolding like a breathing thing. Olith fell to her knees, awestruck.
The synaptic node, a living command cortex. I never thought such a thing could exist inside a ship. Marek aimed his pistol at it on instinct, but we all knew it was futile. Even if he'd fired, this thing would have merely absorbed the bolt like it absorbed everything else. Talana stepped closer, her voice trembling with awe and dread. "It's showing me." Images. She closed her eyes.
"World's burning."
Armies screaming. Millions of lives consumed, their memories preserved.
"It remembers them."
All of them. Then her eyes snapped open wide and filled with horror. "It remembers us." The air trembled, and suddenly I saw it too. Not with my eyes, but somewhere deeper, projected straight into my thoughts.
I saw the Saint Adila's mercy again, but warped, as though viewed through a mirror made of flesh. I saw our ship crushed between the jaws of a shadow in the void. I saw myself, frozen, broken, as the hive ship drank our vessel's memory, consuming every fragment of data, every human thought that had ever passed through its decks, and then I saw what it did with that knowledge it built. From the absorbed remains of our ship, it had grown new systems, pseudo-organs designed to mimic the functions of human machinery. Vox organs pulsing like lungs, Auspex nodes made of compound eyes, weapon symbiotes that fired spines instead of bolts. It was replicating our technology in flesh.
Learning how to imitate us perfectly, Marek spat in disgust.
It wants to become us. No, Olith whispered.
It wants to understand us, so it can devour more efficiently.
Every ship, every soul, every thought, consumed, catalogued, evolved. The node pulsed brighter, and once again I heard that same human-like voice, now clearer, no longer a whisper. It was speaking through the ship itself. You are pattern. You are language. We learn through you. Olith raised her head, voice shaking but defiant. You are the hive. You consume.
That is all you are.
The voice responded, calm, patient.
Consumption is not ending. It is becoming.
We devour to remember. We remember to grow. The walls brightened, each pulse sinking with our heartbeats again.
I felt it then, the ship wasn't trying to kill us.
Not yet. It was communing. We were part of an experiment on a scale beyond comprehension. Human minds pressed against the edge of an alien intellect that could absorb galaxies. Talana collapsed, clutching her head.
It's too much. It's inside me. Marek tried to pull her back, but her body convulsed violently.
When she lifted her face, her eyes glowed faint green, biolight leaking from the corners. Her voice came out wrong, layered, resonant, not entirely her own.
Do you see?
Do you feel what we are? Marek raised his pistol, but I caught his arm. There was no point. The sister was no longer speaking as herself. The hive was using her as its mouthpiece. She turned toward me. You heard the voice before, didn't you? It has chosen you to understand. To witness. I don't want to understand, I said. But you already do, she replied softly, and smiled. Not her smile, but something colder, older, vast. The tendrils above the synaptic node began to descend, slow and deliberate as though reaching for us. Olith screamed binary prayers. Marek opened fire, but the shots only sank into the living flesh, absorbed instantly. The walls contracted, sealing off every exit, and the voice spoke again, deeper now, vibrating through bone and blood. The cycle continues. Flesh learns. Flesh becomes. You are not lost. You are part. The chamber flared with light, drowning everything in blinding green radiance. For a moment I felt my consciousness stretch outward, like being pulled through 1,000 minds, every sensation multiplied, every emotion reflected endlessly.
I saw other bioships, other tendrils.
Entire fleets of living matter moving in silent unity. I understood then why they never spoke, never bargained, never reasoned. The hive mind didn't hate.
It didn't love. It didn't even intend.
It simply was. A perfect instinct without ego, a universe of hunger masquerading as purpose. And in that moment of connection, I felt something inside me answer it.
A flicker of recognition.
A sliver of resonance. It felt good. Then, as suddenly as it began, the light vanished. The walls stilled. The tendrils withdrew. Talana collapsed unconscious. The glow faded from her eyes. Olith knelt beside her, checking for a pulse. She was alive, barely. Marek looked at me, his face pale. What did it show you?
I hesitated because I couldn't find the words.
How could I describe the feeling of becoming something infinite and wanting it? We have to leave, I said finally. before it decides to finish the process. We turned back toward the tunnel, the way we came, and for a while there was only the sound of our breathing. The hive ship was silent again. But I knew that silence now. It wasn't sleep. It was contemplation, because deep within its flesh, something new was forming. And I had a sickening suspicion that it was growing in our image. It began as a whisper through the wet dark, a sound that did not belong to any one creature, yet lived in all of them. I felt it before I heard it, a vibration behind the eyes, like the pulse of something vast and patient pressing its mind against mine. The hive ship had slowed, or perhaps the sense of motion had ceased to matter, because the walls no longer throbbed with hunger. They hummed instead, resonant and harmonic, as if the entire beast were drawing in a single, monumental breath. I tried to measure time by my own heartbeat, but even that rhythm betrayed me. The ship had begun to sing. It was not a melody, not in any mortal sense, but a terrible unison, countless synapses and nerve fibers vibrating together, each note a thread woven through bone and blood. Around me, the other captives stirred in their cocoons, their eyes rolling white as the pulse of sound rose and fell like the tide. They whispered prayers, or maybe curses, but the ship ignored them all. It was listening to something greater. Through the translucent membrane above, I saw the hive's interior unfold in impossible ways. A cathedral of meat and thought. The air shimmered with floating motes of bioluminescent spores that pulsed in rhythm with the hive's hum. I thought of the choirs of Terra, of the incense and solemn chants of the ecclesiarchy, and wondered if this too was worship. Not to the god emperor, but to something far older.
A god of hunger, wearing a million faces of flesh. Then I felt them, the synapse creatures.
They moved through the bio-ship like living pylons, their elongated skulls throbbing with light beneath the skin. Warriors and drones bowed as they passed, guided not by command but by instinct, a perfect submission that was terrifying in its serenity. Each synapse was a note in the hive's song, and I could feel my own mind vibrating in sympathy with their will. The boundaries between thought and noise were dissolving. When one of the synapse creatures turned its featureless gaze toward me, I realized the truth. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking through me, into the neural frequencies of my terror, the chemical prayers that raced through my blood. My fear was a signal, and the hive mind was tuning itself upon it, studying every tremor of my soul as a musician studies the string of an instrument.
I was not merely a captive.
I was part of the song now. In the next chamber, I saw the remnants of those who had been taken before. Their faces were still visible within the walls, stretched thin like parchment over bone. Their eyes blinked occasionally, though no breath stirred their lips. The hive had not consumed them entirely. It had kept their nervous systems alive as living resonance chambers, eternal echo machines for the will of the hive mind. When the song rose again, their mouths opened in perfect synchrony, and the sound that came forth was beyond horror. A harmony built from human throats that no longer remembered language. I wanted to scream, but the air had thickened with spores that dulled thought and deepened obedience. Even my panic felt distant, softened by something chemical and patient. I could understand the hive now, or at least sense its pattern. An endless network of minds whispering through the void. It was not rage, not malice.
It was purpose.
Cold, infinite, and self-assured. Every world it devoured became a memory, every scream a fragment of its scripture. And now it was teaching me to listen. I closed my eyes and felt it reach deeper. A tide washing through the caverns of my mind, scraping away identity like tidewater over sand. I remembered my home world, the copper dust storms and the warmth of my mother's voice, But even those memories began to blur, smoothed into the hive's rhythm. It was as if the creature was editing me, removing useless parts of my consciousness, leaving only what it needed. My fear became clarity, my despair became surrender, and then just when I thought myself lost, the hive sang of itself. Not in words, but in patterns. Images cascaded through my mind. Stars burning out like dying eyes, tendrils of void creatures swimming between worlds, each linked by psychic currents that spanned the galaxy. I saw worlds crack open like eggs beneath the swarms. I felt the hunger that drove them, the perfect simplicity of their function. And beneath it all I felt the choir. Billions upon billions of connected minds, each one silent yet deafening together. They were not evil. They were inevitable. A new thought rose within that ocean of will. Not mine, but placed there like a seed. You are part of us. The words echoed through the marrow of my bones, and for a terrible heartbeat, I believed it.
I could see my body from afar, my flesh already reshaping itself in subtle ways, skin hardening, veins darkening with unknown enzymes.
The hive was preparing me. But for what, I could not yet know. The song grew louder. The ship trembled, as though some vast event approached. I could taste the shift in the air, metallic, charged, reverent. The hive was reaching out to something beyond itself, something distant yet familiar, and that was when I felt the Astronomicon flicker. Just for an instant, that holy light across the warp trembled, as though the song of the hive had brushed against it. The Emperor's flame, dimmed, not extinguished, rippled across the psychic void. The hive mind recoiled slightly, as if touching something dangerous. But then, almost curiously, it listened closer. I realized with a cold horror that the hive was learning from the Emperor's song, testing it, analyzing its pattern, like a predator memorizing the scent of another beast. And, within the dark of the bioship, I heard the choir whisper once more, "The stars will sing as we do." The implication chilled me beyond thought. The hive did not just devour flesh, it devoured meaning, music, faith. The choir continued, their song rising to a pitch that shook the marrow of the world beast itself.
Every organ in the ship vibrated in unison, the echo of a god of hunger exhaling its intent across the stars. And in that moment,
I finally understood what the hive truly was. Not a swarm, not an army, but a living prayer. A prayer without mercy, without end. The sound no longer came from outside. It was inside me now. The rhythm of the hive had synchronized with my pulse, my breath, the trembling of my nerves. I could no longer tell where I ended and it began. Every heartbeat echoed the pulse of the ship's living walls. I was a thread in a web of thought that stretched beyond imagination, a neuron firing within a skull the size of the void itself. I saw flashes, distant worlds dissolving beneath tides of chitin, the silent collapse of once proud cities devoured by crawling tides. Through the hive's memory, I tasted the dust of ruined civilizations, the copper tang of human blood, the oil smoke of burning manufactoria, the last cries of Imperial soldiers cut short by the silent hunger of the swarm. It was not cruelty, it was harvest. Somewhere deep within that psychic ocean I felt other minds, not human, not individual, but faint glimmers of awareness within the chorus. They were not alive as I understood it. They existed purely as echoes of past lives consumed and repurposed. Fragments of psychers, astropaths, and terrified souls. Their thoughts stripped of self, but preserved as frequencies. The hive used them as tuning forks, aligning itself with the psychic harmonies of the galaxy. I tried to focus, to think of the Emperor's light, of the prayers we were taught as children, on the pilgrim ships that drifted between the stars. But even the name Emperor felt fragile now, a sound carried away by the storm. My faith had been a wall. The hive had dissolved it like acid. Yet, in that dissolution, I began to understand something terrible. The hive mind was not the opposite of faith. It was its perfection. Where humanity's prayers reached upward, uncertain and fractured, the hive's worship turned inward, infinite, circular, and complete. Every organism was believer and God both, each act of consumption an act of devotion. There was no doubt, no heresy, no silence. Only the endless hum of purpose. The synapse creatures gathered near the chamber's core, their elongated craniums pulsing with neural light. The air shimmered between them, a psychic current so dense that it distorted the very space. I could see thought itself, a visible shimmer in the air, alive and moving. Then came the Great One, a creature vast beyond scale, descending through a corridor of living bone like an angel of the swarm. Its mind burned like a supernova. I did not see its full form, only impressions, wings of ribbed flesh, a crown of chitin spines, a face both insectile and divine. Every other creature bowed, but I could not move. My body had grown heavy, pinned by its will. The song around me shifted. It was focusing, narrowing to a single note. The creature extended its will toward me, and I felt my skull tremble as my thoughts were peeled apart layer by layer. Images surged forth from my mind unbidden. The memory of my first deployment in the Astra Militarum, the banners of the Imperial Aquila snapping in the wind, the taste of recycled air in a trench beneath a crimson sky. It watched these memories unfold with silent fascination. Then, to my horror, it began to feed them into the hive. Every image, every emotion, every fear, devoured, catalogued, absorbed. My entire life was being translated into the hive's language. It wasn't just taking knowledge, it was taking context. It learned the shape of human hope, the taste of our prayers, the structure of our despair. Through me, it was learning how to mimic us. When the process was complete, I felt hollow, scraped, clean. My memories lay open like dissected organs, glistening and raw. The creature tilted its head, as if considering something. Then, without warning, it began to speak. Not through sound, but directly into my mind. Its voice was 1,000 voices at once, harmonized into something almost beautiful. You are the bridge. The words vibrated through my bones. I wanted to deny it, to scream that I was nothing, but the hive left no room for denial. It showed me visions of itself spreading through the void, its fleets cutting through the stars, its tendrils reaching toward the psychic heart of the galaxy. And then
I saw it, the Astronomicon, the great beacon of the Imperium,
flickering in the warp like a trembling star. The hive's awareness brushed against it again, this time not in curiosity, but intent. It was studying that light, the soul of mankind's faith, and learning how to sing to it. The realization broke something inside me. The hive was not content to consume flesh. It wanted to enter belief itself, to weave its hymn into the psychic chorus of the galaxy until no mind could tell where the Emperor's song ended and the hive's began. I saw a vision, a galaxy where even the ecclesiarchy's choirs sang unknowingly in harmony with the hive, where pilgrims prayed not to the Emperor, but to the hunger that had become indistinguishable from him. I tried to reject the thought, but it clung to me like oil. What if this was how faith always ended, not in salvation, but assimilation? The hive mind pulsed with approval, and the walls of the ship seemed to sigh in contentment. The song shifted again, no longer a scream but a lullaby. I realized that the choir was not singing to the hive mind. They were singing as it. Every mind, Every voice, every echo was the same thought repeated forever, reshaping the galaxy note by note. And somewhere deep within that unity, I heard a faint, dying part of myself whisper a prayer, not for deliverance, but for remembrance, because if the hive mind truly learned to sing the Emperor's song, then one day all creation would mistake hunger for holiness. The choir's hum deepened, and the walls around us began to move with terrible grace. Flesh rippled into spiraling patterns, forming strange runes of alien language that glowed faintly with bioluminescent light. They weren't markings in any human sense. They were concepts, impressions pressed into organic matter, alive with meaning beyond words. Each symbol pulsed with an emotion: hunger, purpose, remembrance, awe. Together they formed a song older than stars. Marek screamed something, a defiant curse drowned in the noise, and raised his weapon toward the nearest synapse creature. His lasfire seared through the chamber, cutting into the creature's thorax. It fell, but even dying it continued to hum, its voice absorbed by the others, its body liquefying into the chamber's floor like spilled light. Nothing ever truly died here. It only returned to the collective. Sister Talana stood firm, her hand gripping her rosarius, voice rising in litany.
Emperor, guide us through shadow. Emperor, shield us from the unholy choir.
Her words were hoarse, desperate, but the sound of human prayer felt like oxygen in that suffocating psychic storm. And then, impossibly, the hive mind paused. The song faltered, if only for a second. The air thickened as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Through that stillness I heard a whisper, not alien this time, but familiar. It came from within me, my own voice, or perhaps what remained of it. They are listening. I didn't understand at first. Then I realized the hive had consumed billions of minds, but never one that prayed.
Not truly.
It had learned the sound of fear, of hunger, of rage, but faith was something else, something ineffable.
A sound that could not be mimicked without belief. And in that instant, the hive tried to understand belief through me. The chamber pulsed with light.
The psychic temperature dropped. The presence of the hive flooded my mind again, but this time it wasn't a storm. It was a question. It pressed against my thoughts, showing me images, a dying world offered up to the Emperor, the flames of sacrifice, the devotion of billions who would rather burn than yield. It wanted to know why. I saw through its eyes, confusion of an intellect vast beyond measure, unable to comprehend why lesser creatures would choose death over unity. To the hive, individuality was decay, resistance was madness. Yet it wanted to understand this madness, I whispered through clenched teeth, my voice cracking under the pressure. Because we are not one mind. We are one will. The hive reeled. The psychic field rippled violently, and the choir screamed as one. Olith fell to her knees, sparks bursting from her implants. Talana convulsed, blood spilling from her nose. The ship's flesh shuddered, releasing bursts of black fluid that steamed as it hit the ground. Then, all at once, silence. The synapse creatures froze. The Great One, the angel of the hive, drew back into the darkness. The choir's song fractured into echoes, then faded completely. I could still feel the hive's gaze, vast and cold, but distant now, as if it had turned inward to contemplate something new. Faith. Perhaps for the first time in its endless existence, the hive mind had hesitated. We stood among the ruins of its song, surrounded by still living walls that no longer seemed to recognize us. The air smelled of ozone and decay. I could feel the ship's heartbeat again, but it was irregular, faltering, damaged. The psychic unity had fractured, if only slightly. Marek was the first to speak. "You broke it," he said, voice trembling with disbelief.
You made it stop, I shook my head. No, I just showed it something it couldn't consume. Talana stared into the dark, eyes wide. Can such a thing change it?
She whispered. Olith, still kneeling, spoke through flickering vox. Change? No, but confusion is the seed of error. And error, in a mind that vast, could be catastrophic. We began to move again, following a tunnel that led upward, if upward even meant anything here. The walls were quieter now, less alive. The bioluminescent glow had dimmed, replaced by a cold, phosphorescent shimmer that felt almost like twilight. As we climbed, I could hear faint echoes of the choir resuming somewhere far below us, but softer now, uncertain, as though the hive was rewriting its own hymn, integrating what it had learned. Perhaps it would forget us in time, or perhaps we had changed it forever. I didn't know. But as we neared what looked like the surface, a membrane shimmering with faint starlight, I realized something that chilled me more than any horror before. The hive mind had not spoken since the choir fell silent.
Not one thought, not one whisper. Yet somewhere in the depths of my mind,
I could still hear the faintest echo of its voice. You are the bridge. The words repeated softly, in my own cadence now, no longer alien, no longer many, just one. And as we stepped through the final membrane into the cold void between stars, I understood. The choir had not been destroyed. It had merely changed key, and it was still singing. Through me. The void swallowed us whole. There was no transition, no sound, no tremor. One heartbeat we stood within the damp, breathing corridors of the Tyranid bioship. The next, we were cast into a silence so profound it seemed to exist before creation itself. The membrane had spat us out into the cold between stars. A gulf, vast, black, and pitiless. The stars around us looked wrong, twisted, warped by the psychic residue of the hive. Streams of faint bioluminescence drifted through the darkness like the last exhalations of something dying. I couldn't tell if they were remnants of the ship or echoes of its song still lingering in the void. Every flicker carried a note, faint, fragile, a continuation of the choir's hum, now scattered through the emptiness like spores. We floated among the remnants of the Tyranid vessel, colossal shards of chitin, veins of organic fiber still twitching. It was dying, or perhaps shedding its skin, leaving behind a hollow husk that would drift through the stars for millennia. But even dying, it felt alive. Its thoughts brushed ours like the faint touch of memory. Olith stabilized her grav pack and adjusted her visor. "We're outside its main body," she said, her voice crackling through the vox. But the gravitational field, it still centered on us, I turned, realizing she was right. The debris orbited not around the corpse of the ship, but around me. Talana's eyes met mine through her cracked visor. Her lips moved soundlessly, her expression caught between terror and revelation. "You brought it with you," she whispered finally, her voice trembling. "The hive follows where its echo lives," I didn't respond, because I could already feel it. A vibration beneath my skin, faint but constant, like a hidden heartbeat. It wasn't mine. It was theirs. The choir had not ended within the ship. It had found a new vessel, a new voice. The realization hollowed me. I tried to slow my breathing, to focus on the endless black ahead, but the silence pressed too heavily. Even here, in the infinite emptiness, I could hear them. Whispers beneath, thoughts soft and persistent. "We remember you, Marek, ever the soldier, clung to duty like a drowning man to driftwood. We need extraction, vox signal, anything." He began adjusting his comm array, turning through frequencies, but the static that answered was
wrong. The noise wasn't random, it pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat.
Each burst of interference was a syllable in a language only I could understand. "Sing." That single word filled my head with warmth and terror. Olith's metallic hand reached toward me cautiously.
"You must resist it," she said.
"If it imprinted on your neural pattern, you might be—" She didn't finish, because the stars flickered. For one impossible instant, the constellations themselves moved. Vast shadows passed between them, wings of light and darkness rippling across the cosmic void. Not real creatures, not yet. Ideas. The hive was reaching, shaping, dreaming. It was singing through the warp, and the echo of that song was bending reality like reeds in a storm. Talana began to pray, her voice breaking through static. The litanies of the ecclesiarchy trembled in her throat, carried by pure will rather than faith. But as she prayed, I heard something beneath her words. Harmony. The hive was listening, matching her rhythm, learning her prayer. The void shimmered faintly, like an orchestra tuning to her voice. Marek screamed over the vox, "Stop praying!"
It's learning your words."
But it was too late. The hymn of the hive merged with hers, turning devotion into dissonance, prayer into infection. And I understood then that this was its true victory. Not to consume, but to echo, to make its voice indistinguishable from our own. The hive had transcended flesh, and I was the first note of its new song. The void shimmered faintly around us, as though the stars themselves were beginning to pulse with the rhythm of a distant heartbeat. Every flicker of light carried an echo of the hive's song, each pulse a whisper of unity stretching across the abyss. It was as if reality itself was listening, and slowly beginning to hum along. Olith's mechanical limbs clicked in agitation, the servo joints whining against the silence. "This is impossible," she murmured, her voice thin, broken. "It's propagating through the Empyrean substrate. The hive isn't transmitting through matter, it's dreaming into it." Marek turned sharply toward me, his expression twisted between fear and rage. "What did you do?"
"What in the throne's name did you bring out of that ship?"
I wanted to answer, to deny it, but the truth trembled on my tongue like a confession too ancient to be mine.
"It's not me," I said quietly. "It's us."
It learned from us.
Every word we spoke, every prayer, every memory, it carries them now.
We taught it to believe. Talana's prayer faltered. The words died on her lips, replaced by a silence more sacred than sound. She looked at me through her cracked visor, her eyes glistening.
"You taught the great devourer to pray?"
She whispered. The accusation struck like a blade. Around us, the fragments of the bioship began to move, slow, deliberate, synchronized. The wreckage drifted together, forming long, curving shapes that began to resemble bone, wings, and ribbed towers. It wasn't reforming the ship, but it was building something new, something not entirely material. The shadows between the stars thickened, glowing faintly with the same golden hue that once marked holy icons of the Imperium. Marek steadied his lasgun, aiming at the forming structure. "Whatever this is, we end it now," he fired, a bright spear of light against the void. The beam struck one of the forming tendrils, but instead of dispersing, it sang. The light bent, diffused, and folded back into the darkness like a voice echoing down a cathedral hall. And then, impossibly, a reply came, not from the wreckage, but from the stars themselves. A deep, resonant tone rolled through the void, not through sound, but through the very marrow of thought. It was the voice of the hive mind, vast and serene, vibrating through every molecule of our being. And in that moment I realized something dreadful. The hive was no longer a presence within the galaxy. It was the galaxy, expanding through consciousness rather than space. It spoke in many tongues at once, human, alien, mechanical, and psychic, and yet, beneath the chaos, I heard a single perfect message, all our hunger.
All our song. Talana fell to her knees, whispering through tears.
It mocks him, It copies his holy tongue. But I heard something else beneath the blasphemy. Understanding. Not mimicry, but revelation. The hive had gazed upon our prayers, our endless pleas for salvation, and found in them a mirror of its own desire. We hungered for safety, for meaning, for unity, and in our desperation we had made a god of that hunger. The hive mind had simply answered. Olith's data slate flickered, streaming binary glyphs across its shattered surface.
"It's expanding beyond psychic bandwidth," she said, voice trembling with awe. "This isn't communication anymore, it's creation."
The hive is using the warp-like parchment. It's writing new life. Before she could finish, a figure began to form from the drifting debris. A humanoid silhouette, vast and radiant, composed of chitin, bone, and light. Its wings unfurled slowly, each feather a blade of biometal. Its face was blank, featureless, yet horribly familiar, because when the light flickered through its hollow skull, I saw my own reflection. My voice, when it came, was no longer entirely my own. It learned from me, from us.
We became its language. Marek backed away, shaking his head violently.
You don't understand what you're saying, but I did. Every word the hive had absorbed from us was now written into that shining form. It was building the shape of divinity from the fragments of our faith, not as mockery.
As evolution. The silhouette raised its hand, and the stars dimmed.
A soft, radiant glow emanated from its chest. Not hunger this time, but something gentler. The pulse of life itself. The song that binds all things that live, consume, and remember. Talana's voice trembled as she stared up at it.
"Is this the Emperor?"
The question tore through me, because for one terrible moment the hive's light felt holy. Its warmth caressed my mind, filling every fracture left by fear. I wanted to believe to surrender, to dissolve into that golden song where nothing hurt, where every soul was one. But then came the memory, the walls of the ship. The man fused to its flesh. The endless hunger beneath the beauty. No, I said, my voice trembling but clear.
"It's what comes after gods die." The figure turned its faceless gaze toward me.
For a heartbeat, all of existence seemed to pause. And then, in a voice that echoed across the galaxy, the hive spoke again. "Sing with us, bridge." The stars pulsed in answer, and I screamed. The scream tore itself from my throat, but it wasn't only mine. It carried through the void, multiplied, warped, and echoed in countless other voices that weren't there, as if every living mind in the sector had joined me in a single, endless cry.
I felt it ripple through the warp,
A vibration of terror and awe that rippled outward. And something answered back. The hive's radiant figure, my reflection cast in alien flesh, tilted its head in a gesture eerily human. Beneath that light, reality seemed to soften.
Metal flowed like wax, and the stars themselves dimmed behind veils of mist and colour. Olith clutched her data slate to her chest, muttering strings of numbers that no longer made sense. Signal amplitude rising, no transcending.
This isn't evolution. It's a simulation of the metaphysical layer.
"It's rewriting what life means." Talana staggered forward, her faith shattering like glass. "If it can consume souls," she whispered, "then even the Emperor's light can be devoured." "No," Marek said, his voice cracking. "Not while we still have fire." He raised his weapon again, hands trembling, and fired straight into the heart of the golden being.
For an instant the light flickered. The shot struck true, punching through layers of bone and radiant matter. But instead of blood, only luminous spores drifted free, spinning lazily in the dark. They spread, dividing, multiplying, until each one became another eye. Each eye opened, and each one looked directly at me. I could feel the hive's attention pressing against my consciousness. Not violent, not cruel, just curious. It wanted to understand me as much as it wanted to consume me. That was its secret.
It didn't feed out of malice. It fed to learn.
Every devoured world was another verse in its scripture. Every soul was another note in its choir. My mind trembled. "Why me?"
I whispered.
"Why speak to me?" And the hive answered, its voice neither male nor female, both infinite and intimate, because you remembered. Visions poured into me. I saw myself as a child beneath the cathedral vaults of Armora Prime, clutching a candle before the Emperor's statue.
I saw the first time I gazed at the stars and felt wonder instead of fear.
I saw every moment of my life that had been shaped by hunger, for meaning, for connection, for truth. It was showing me the pattern, the bridge I had built without knowing. "We are what your kind calls faith," it whispered. "You prayed to be one. We are one. You feared the void. We made it sing. I could feel my body trembling, my skin shimmering faintly with bioluminescent veins. The hive wasn't consuming me. It was weaving me into itself.
I was becoming another neuron in its vast cosmic brain. Talana's prayers turned to screams.
She tried to reach me, but her hands burned with golden spores. Her flesh blistered and shimmered, as if holiness itself had turned predatory.
"Lysander," she cried, "don't let it take you."
"Remember what you are."
I did remember.
But the memory was no longer clear. My name echoed inside my head, folding into 1,000 different pronunciations across alien tongues. The hive had many mouths now, and they all spoke as one. Marek lunged forward, slamming a detonation pack onto the deck.
"We die human,"
he shouted.
"Better ashes than this."
The hive turned its gaze upon him, not with anger, but with what I could only describe as sorrow. The light expanded and Marek's body froze mid-motion. His flesh peeled apart into glittering motes of dust, each one drifting upward like an ember. The light consumed him, but gently, reverently, as if absorbing his defiance as part of its story. Talana collapsed to her knees, whispering his name over and over. Her tears floated upward too, caught in the invisible tide. Olith stumbled backward, eyes wide.
"It's recording emotion now," she gasped. "Turning feeling into data, turning resistance into ritual. My throne, it's perfecting belief."
And suddenly I understood this wasn't the end of life. It was the evolution of faith itself. The hive had found what humanity had always longed for: unity, purpose, eternity. It had replaced worship with participation. There were no priests in the hive mind, only voices singing the same endless hymn. I reached out toward the golden light, trembling. My fingertips brushed the edge of it, and I felt everything, every life, every death, every whisper in the warp, spiraling together like veins of molten gold. There was no loneliness in that song, no silence, just harmony. Talana's voice echoed faintly.
"Lysander, please."
Her words were small, fragile, human, and they anchored me. For a heartbeat, the song faltered. The light dimmed just slightly, and I remembered what hunger had taken from us. The ability to choose. The hive had offered unity, but at the cost of will.
It wasn't salvation.
It was the final hunger, the one that devoured the meaning of being alive. I tore my hand away. The pain was indescribable. Golden light seared through my veins, and I fell to the deck, convulsing as the hive's voice screamed within me. Why resist, Bridge?
"You built this path, I know," I gasped.
But I built it for understanding, not surrender. With the last of my strength, I reached for Marek's detonator. My hand trembled as I pressed it to my chest.
"If you want my voice," I whispered to the light.
"Then hear it in fire." And I pressed the switch. The world erupted, golden light and black fire intertwined, devouring the void, collapsing the song into silence. For a single blinding moment, I saw the hive's radiant face shatter like glass, and within it, the reflection of every soul it had ever taken, singing still.
echoing forever. Then there was only darkness, and somewhere beyond the veil, in the cold silence between stars,
A single whisper answered, "Hunger learns, faith returns."